The fusion of the warrior and the horse, sometimes simply called a horseman, occurred in forgotten prehistoric times. Because it was so long ago, it is hard for us to trace the stages of this process. But one thing is for sure. At first, there was the armed pedestrian warrior, and later the armed mounted warrior appeared. People tamed horses comparatively late, in about 5000 BC, somewhere near the northern coast of the Black Sea. The horse, together with the first Indo-Europeans, came to the eastern coast of the Baltic Sea in around 3000 BC. Symbols distinguishing mounted warriors appeared among Baltic artifacts in the 1st century after Christ. About the year 70, special spurs designed to control the horse, and a little later bits appeared. Between 70 and 150 AD, an entire set of accoutrements for mounted warriors formed. It consisted of spurs, a bridle and a bit, and a horse cloth or saddle. In the middle of the 5th century, a new item, stirrups, which were a breakthrough in military technology, appeared. It is thought that nomadic groups called Alani and Avari invented them. The Balts quickly assimilated this invention, and starting in the 7th century, there are a lot of examples of it in our heritage. The belt that used to accompany a warrior's clothing came from the most ancient prehistoric times, and exceptional belt decoration for a warrior of the first decades of the new era became an indicator of the warrior's status in society. Belt buckles and tongues were made from brass or metal. The leather strap of a belt of a famous warrior was decorated with small open-work discs, which sometimes even had animal figures on them. In the middle of the 3rd century, a new piece of equipment for warriors appeared. It was widely used among Roman soldiers. These were baldricks. The earliest Baltic baldricks were found in the Saukėnai cemetery in the Nemunas River Basin cultural habitat. In later centuries, they were also common in the Skalviai lands. Impressive baldricks were uncovered in the Plinkaigalis, Vidgiriai and Marvelė cemeteries. One of the most artistic ones was found in the Vidgiriai Duke's grave from the beginning of the 6th century. The most essential attributes of mounted warriors and their artistic expression formed quite early. Regarding spurs, examples that have flat bases with bulging spikes are considered to be the earliest ones. Such spurs became common as early as in the year 70. They were fastened to the rider's shoe with rivets, and artistic creativity was expressed in the variety of the shapes of the small discs. Another type of spur was the arch spur, which was completed with a button or add-on in the form of a small pommel. This and the 3rd type of spur, which is also called Baltic, were fastened to shoes using little leather straps. In an arch that imitated the form of the shoe and the foot, there was space for art to be expressed. The edges of the arches were decorated with rows of cast fringes or other ornaments, and the arches were created with profiles that sometimes even formed the silhouette of a bird. During the entire Iron Age, the Baltic world created a large variety of spur forms, including the star spurs. In the molded spikes of some spurs, the most unexpected abstractions were embodied. Bits as well as spurs are known among our artifacts starting as early as the year 70. The earliest type is a 2-part bit with little crossbars at the ends. The second type has links at the ends. During the entire first millennium, bits of the Baltic tribes were either 2-part or 3-part with round links, and they either had a cheek stick or did not. Cheek sticks were the part of bits that was most often decorated. They were made of iron, brass and horn. In eastern Lithuania, they were most often decorated with grooves that went across the piece or groups of such grooves, and sometimes they were decorated with open work. Cheek sticks used by Aukštaičiai, Žemaičiai and Kuršiai often had a concave lower part and cutouts on the edges, and some of them were completed by adding tiny stylized heads of animals. Horn cheek sticks were often decorated. On the top of a horn cheek stick found in the Graužiai cemetery from the 11th to the 12th centuries, a stylized head of a horse was carved. People also liked to decorate cheek sticks cast from brass with the same type of little heads. Bridles are probably best known in our archaeology from the earliest times, from as early as 500 BC. Later traces of bridles were found in burial monuments from 150 to 220 AD. The exceptional relationship between the mounted warrior and the horse, entrenched in the Baltic burial customs from the Iron Age, revealed impressive examples of Baltic art. Starting in the 2nd century and until the establishment of Christianity, riders buried together with a horse are found almost everywhere in Lithuania. Sacrifices of a horse's head and legs are found in the graves of Žemaičiai men from the 5th through the 12th centuries, and parts of equestrian equipment are found in graves of the Kuršiai from the 7th to the 12th centuries. Horses are also found in graves of Skalviai noblemen from the second half of the 5th century. Aukštaičiai buried horses in separate cemeteries, and the cremated remains of many Lithuanians are found with stirrups and bits. There are cases known when remains of cremated Lithuanians were put in an urn made from saddle loops. Research into cemeteries of Aukštaičiai horses revealed the most eminent artistic examples of clothing worn by horses and riders. Impressive examples of bits with cheek sticks and bridles were found in the Rimaisai horse cemetery from the 11th through the 12th centuries. Iron cheek sticks were covered with silver. They were connected with bridle straps by a dressy binding covered in silver, the ends of which were decorated with stylized heads of horses. A massive round separator with an elevation in the middle connected chest straps covered with silver. Among Aukštaičiai horse bridles found in the Veršvų and Marvelė cemeteries, there are both complicated bridles with 2 crossbars or little straps crossed on the forehead and the nose, as well as simpler bridles with 1 strap. They were decorated with 1, 3, 4 or even 5 rows of brass cones. Brass coils or little chains with trapezium-shaped pendants were hung on the upper part of bridles. Brass pendants decorated the horse's forehead, collars decorated and protected its neck, and the mane was stuck through a small piece of rolled ornamented tin. The horse's tail was decorated in a similar way. Horse cloths, found in monuments from the 5th through the 13th centuries, were decorated with diamond-shaped pieces of tin. The edges were decorated with brass coils and the corners had fringes of brass coils. Saddles were made from leather and wood, and there are no such examples remaining. However, we have metal saddle and brig buckles, and starting with the 7th century when stirrups became popular among the Balts, many examples of stirrups are found in burial monuments and settlements. Saddle loops vary quite a lot in shape. Quite a large part of them were decorated with different ornaments or covered in little ornamented silver discs, and the form itself was often artistic. Saddle loops, from the 10th through the 12th centuries with a flattened arch at the top of which a square hole was made for inserting the belt, were especially artistic. Sometimes the edges of such loops were cut out in a similar way as the edges of cheek sticks, and sometimes they were covered with silver and decorated with ornaments like the Rimaisai saddle loop, the front part of which was decorated with stylized plant and animal motifs. Baltic warriors liked to decorate their weapons. Starting in the second half of the 5th century, Baltic weapons were ornamented increasingly often. The biggest variety of ornaments on arms from the 5th to the 8th centuries can be found on narrow-headed axes. Different ornamented designs decorated the axe's shaft, blade edges and head. Starting in the Viking era, spearheads, the sheaths of which were decorated with the rows of cuts and notches, and handles and crossbars of double-edged swords, which were true pieces of art, were found more and more often. Sheaths of battle knives and swords represent many examples of preserved art. A sword sheath that belonged to a Taurapilės duke from the early part of the 6th century is particularly artistic. In warrior graves of the Žiemgaliai and Latgaliai tribes from the 10th through the 11th centuries, unique pieces of equipment of a warrior, called warrior's bracelets, are found. Warriors wore especially massive and heavy bracelets on their left wrist, and in the right hand they held a wide sword, characteristic of those tribes alone. The artistry of warriors' bracelets bears witness to a profound tradition of decorating warriors. The accoutrements of mounted warriors and horses, as well as weaponry, and the traditions of its decoration, became established during prehistoric Baltic times. They were adopted by the warriors of the Grand Duchy of Lithuania from ancient times.